Ethan Carter never expected his simple space journey to turn into a nightmare. One moment, he was piloting his small transport ship through deep space, and the next, he was surrounded by massive alien warships. Before he could react, his systems went offline, and his ship was pulled into the hangar of a colossal battleship. Now, standing inside a grand hall with towering alien figures watching him, Ethan felt completely helpless. The room was massive, with glowing blue walls covered in strange symbols. At the far end, a group of armored aliens sat on a raised platform, the Zyth High Council. These aliens were tall, their skin smooth like polished metal, with piercing golden eyes that glowed under the dim light. A voice echoed through the chamber. "Human, you have been chosen." Ethan swallowed hard as a tall, fearsome alien woman stepped forward. She had deep violet skin, sharp features, and wore ceremonial armor that shimmered like silver. A long, regal cape trailed behind her. She looked down at him with a gaze that could freeze fire. This was Princess Veyara Zyth, heir to the Zyth Dominion. Ethan frowned. Chosen for what? An elder from the High Council stood up. His voice was deep and commanding. To become the royal consort of Princess Veyara. Ethan blinked. Wait. What? The elder continued as if this were completely normal. The prophecy foretells that a foreigner, not of our kind, shall unite our people and prevent the Great War. You are that foreigner. Ethan let out a dry laugh. You've got the wrong guy. I'm just a mechanic. I don't even have a kingdom, let alone an empire. Princess Veyara's jaw tightened. She looked just as frustrated as he felt. I do not want this either, human. But tradition demands it. Ethan shook his head. This was insane. What if I refuse? One of the guards stepped forward, gripping a plasma spear. The elder's voice turned cold. Then your species will bear the consequences. Ethan's heart pounded. He understood the threat. The Zyth Dominion was one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. If he refused, they might declare war on humanity. He had no choice. He turned to Veyara. You're really okay with this? She hesitated, then looked away. Duty comes before personal feelings. Ethan sighed. Great. That makes two of us. The forced ceremony. Within hours, Ethan was taken to a grand chamber where the marriage ceremony was set to take place. The walls shimmered with floating orbs of golden light, and alien melodies echoed through the halls. Hundreds of Zyth nobles gathered to witness the event. Ethan stood next to Veyara, who looked as rigid as a statue. She held a ceremonial dagger in her hands. The High Council elder spoke. The bonding ritual begins. Ethan expected some long, complicated alien tradition. Instead, Veyara made a small cut on her palm with the dagger, then turned to him. He took a nervous step back. I don't need to do that, do I? Veyara's golden eyes narrowed. It is just a scratch. Ethan sighed and took the dagger. He made the smallest possible cut on his palm. Wincing, before he could react, Veyara clasped his hand, and the glowing blood from their wounds mixed. A strange warmth shot through Ethan's veins. The crowd cheered. The bond was complete. Ethan muttered under his breath, "This is the worst honeymoon ever. A prisoner in luxury." After the ceremony, Ethan was taken to a massive suite inside Zyth Prime, the floating citadel that served as the royal capital. The room was luxurious, with a massive window overlooking the stars, elegant furniture, and a bed big enough for 4 people. But it was still a prison. Ethan paced around, trying to figure out an escape plan. His door was guarded, and his communicator had been taken. He was alone on an alien world, married to an 8-foot-tall warrior princess, and expected to play along with their traditions. This just keeps getting better, he muttered. A few moments later, the door slid open. Veyara entered, her expression unreadable. She crossed her arms. "You will remain here for now. Do not cause trouble." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't worry. I love being a prisoner in a fancy hotel." Veyara frowned. "You are not a prisoner. You are my consort. Ethan scoffed. That's just a fancy way of saying prisoner with extra steps. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She turned to leave but hesitated. This is not easy for me either, human. I did not choose this. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I get it. She nodded once and left. As the door locked behind her, Ethan sat on the massive bed and rubbed his temples. He needed a plan. And fast. Ethan sat on the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was luxurious, but it still felt like a cage. He needed to find a way out, or at least figure out what these aliens really wanted from him. His thoughts were interrupted by voices outside his door. The thick metal walls muffled the conversation, but he could still hear bits and pieces. He is a risk, should not be trusted. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Someone didn't want him here. He moved quietly toward the door, pressing his ear against it. If the princess refuses, we must take action. His hands clenched into fists. Someone was plotting against Veyara. Ethan knew one thing. If there was trouble, he needed to know about it before it reached him. He glanced around the room, searching for anything useful. The walls were smooth, without any vents or hidden exits. The only way out was through the heavy, reinforced door. He sighed. Guess I'm not escaping today. An unexpected visit. An hour later, the door slid open, and Veyara stepped inside. She was dressed in a dark, elegant robe, her golden eyes sharp as ever. Ethan sat up. To what do I owe the pleasure, my dear wife? Veyara ignored his sarcasm. You are not adjusting well. He shrugged. Hard to adjust when you're kidnapped and married on the same day. She crossed her arms. This is not a prison. You have freedom, within reason. Ethan smirked. Right. Freedom inside this one room. Veyara sighed. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and tossed something onto the table. It was a small translator device. Ethan picked it up. What's this? You do not understand our language well. This will help you communicate better. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So now you care about making me comfortable. Veyara's face remained neutral. It is necessary. Ethan didn't trust her kindness. And what happens if I refuse to play along? Veyara's expression darkened. Then you will make enemies. Powerful ones. Ethan exhaled slowly. I see. Veyara turned to leave but stopped at the doorway. Do not be foolish, human. This world is dangerous. And then she was gone. The secret passage. Ethan stared at the translator in his hand. Maybe this was the first step in understanding what was really happening. Deciding to test it, he walked around the room, looking for anything written in the alien language. That's when he noticed a small panel near the window. It was covered in strange symbols. He pressed the translator against it, and the symbols shifted into English. Maintenance access. Authorized personnel only. Ethan's eyes widened. A maintenance hatch. He pressed against the panel, and to his surprise, it slid open with a faint hiss. Behind it was a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. His heart pounded. Was this his chance to escape? Taking a deep breath, Ethan climbed inside. The passage was small, barely wide enough for him to crawl through. The metal walls felt cold, and the air smelled like old machinery. He moved carefully, trying not to make any noise. After a few minutes, he reached a junction where the tunnel split in two directions. Suddenly, he heard voices. Someone was coming. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, holding his breath. The council will not allow it. She is too weak. The human is nothing. He will not survive long. Ethan's mind raced. They were talking about Veyara. Someone in the Zyth council wanted to remove her, and possibly him too. He needed to get back before he was caught. Carefully, he crawled backward, retracing his path to his room. Confrontation with Veyara. The moment Ethan returned, he locked the panel and sat on the bed, trying to process everything. Veyara was in danger. If she was removed, what would happen to him? Before he could think further, the door opened again. Veyara entered, looking more tense than before. "You look troubled." Ethan hesitated. Should he tell her what he heard? Could he even trust her? Instead, he chose his words carefully. "Let me ask you something. Do you actually have power in this place, or are you just a symbol?" Veyara's golden eyes narrowed. "Why do you ask?" Ethan leaned forward. "Because I think there are people who don't want you in charge." For the first time, Ethan saw something in Veyara's expression. Doubt. Worry. She didn't respond immediately, which told him everything. Ethan stood up. "Look, I don't like being here, and I sure as hell don't like being forced into this marriage. But if I'm going to survive, I need to know what's really going on." Veyara studied him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "We should not talk here." She turned and motioned for him to follow. Ethan hesitated but decided to go. Wherever she was taking him, it was clear this marriage was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Ethan followed Veyara down a long, dark corridor. The walls were smooth metal, and the air smelled faintly of something mechanical. Dim lights pulsed along the floor, guiding their way. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked. Veyara didn't answer immediately. She walked with purpose, her golden eyes focused ahead. Finally, she spoke. "Somewhere safe. We cannot talk in the open." Ethan frowned. "Why? Who's listening?" Veyara stopped at a heavy door. She placed her palm against a glowing panel, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Everyone," she said. "The secret chamber." Inside was a circular room with holographic displays floating in the air. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and at the center stood a large curved table with glowing maps. Ethan whistled. "Looks like a war room." Veyara turned to face him. "That's because it is." Ethan folded his arms. "All right, enough games. I need to know the truth. Why did your people force me into this marriage? And why do I feel like a target?" Veyara's expression hardened. "Because you are." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Explain." She took a deep breath. "The Zyth Empire is not as stable as it appears. The Council, our ruling body, has long been divided. Some believe we should remain isolated, ruling over our worlds without interference. Others want expansion. And then there's me." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want?" "I want peace," Veyara said firmly. "For years, I have pushed for diplomacy with other species. I believe that alliances would make us stronger, not war." Ethan rubbed his chin. "Let me guess. The war faction doesn't like that." Veyara nodded. "They think I am weak. They say my rule is a danger to our empire. And when I refused to marry a noble from one of their houses, they used the law against me." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "You mean that ancient law about marrying an outsider?" "Yes," Veyara said. "It was never meant to be enforced. It was only a relic of the past. But they used it as a way to remove my power." Ethan shook his head. "So that means our marriage wasn't just about humiliating you." "No," Veyara said. "It was about control. By forcing me to marry a human, an outsider, they weakened my position. They expected you to be a liability, a reason for them to strip me of my authority." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Great, so I'm not just your unwanted husband. I'm also the reason people want you gone." Veyara looked away. "I did not choose this, but now that you are here, we must both survive." A sudden attack. Before Ethan could respond, the lights flickered. A loud, metallic thud echoed from above. Veyara's eyes widened. "They found us." Ethan spun toward the door. "Who?" Veyara reached for a small console on the table, tapping a few glowing symbols. A holographic screen appeared, showing figures in dark armor moving through the corridors. "They're not royal guards," Ethan muttered. "Assassins." Veyara's jaw tightened. "Loyalists to the war faction. If they kill me, the Council will declare my rule over." Ethan's pulse quickened. "And what happens to me?" Veyara didn't answer. Ethan didn't need her to. If they were coming for her, they wouldn't let him live either. Veyara grabbed a sleek, metallic blade from the table and tossed a smaller weapon to Ethan. It was a compact energy pistol, shaped like a small cylinder. Ethan caught it awkwardly. "You expect me to fight with this? I don't even know how to use it." Veyara pulled him behind a control panel. "Point and press the trigger. It is not difficult." The door hissed as it started to open. Ethan barely had time to react before the first attacker stepped through. The figure was massive, clad in black armor with glowing red markings. He held a curved blade, its edge sparking with energy. Veyara moved like lightning. She dodged the first strike and slashed her own blade across the attacker's arm. Sparks flew as the armor cracked. Ethan raised the pistol, aiming at the second figure rushing in. He squeezed the trigger. A bolt of blue energy shot out, striking the attacker's shoulder. The assassin stumbled, but didn't go down. Ethan's eyes widened. Of course, it's not that easy. The armored warrior lunged at him. Escape plan. Ethan barely dodged, rolling to the side. Veyara fought fiercely, but more assassins were pouring in. "We can't hold them off forever," Ethan shouted. Veyara parried an attack and nodded. "We need to reach the escape tunnel." She pressed a hidden switch on the wall, and a section of the floor slid open, revealing a dark passage beneath. "Go," she ordered. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dropped into the tunnel, landing on cold metal. A moment later, Veyara followed, sealing the entrance behind them. They were plunged into darkness. Ethan caught his breath. "Okay, that was way too close." Veyara's voice was calm but firm. "They will not stop. We must move." Ethan groaned. "So what's the plan? Keep running forever?" Veyara glanced at him. "No, we fight back." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what?" She narrowed her eyes. "You wanted answers, Ethan. Now you have them. If we do nothing, we will both be hunted until the Council takes full control." Ethan sighed. "Great, so now we're fugitives." Veyara turned, leading the way into the dark tunnel. "Not fugitives, Ethan. Rebels." Ethan followed, his grip tightening around the pistol. Things had just gotten a lot more complicated. Ethan followed Veyara through the dark tunnel, his breathing heavy. The walls were rough metal, and the only sound was their hurried footsteps. His grip tightened around the energy pistol. "Where does this tunnel lead?" Ethan asked. "To an old outpost," Veyara replied, moving quickly. "It was once used by my ancestors as a secret meeting place. No one knows it exists anymore." Ethan frowned. "You're sure about that?" Veyara hesitated. "Mostly." Ethan sighed. "Great, that makes me feel so much better." A desperate escape. They walked for several minutes before the tunnel widened into a small chamber. Dim blue lights flickered along the ceiling. In the center of the room was a control panel, covered in dust. Veyara wiped the dust away and pressed a few buttons. A holographic screen lit up, displaying a map of the palace above. Ethan glanced at it. "Looks like we made it out, but I don't think we're safe yet." Veyara nodded. "The Council will not give up. They will send their best hunters after us." Ethan sighed. "And let me guess, they don't take prisoners." Veyara's face darkened. "No, they do not." A sudden beeping noise made Ethan jump. Veyara turned to the console, eyes narrowing. "We are not alone." Ethan gripped his weapon. More assassins. Veyara shook her head. "No, someone is trying to contact us." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Friend or enemy?" Veyara hesitated, then pressed a button. A holographic figure appeared above the console. It was a middle-aged alien with sharp blue eyes and silver markings on his forehead. His voice was calm but urgent. "Veyara, if you are seeing this, then I assume you have escaped the palace." Veyara tensed. "Admiral Kalos." Ethan glanced at her. "You know him." "He was one of my father's closest advisors," Veyara said. He disappeared years ago. The hologram continued. The Council is moving faster than I expected. They have already sent their bounty hunter after you. Ethan groaned. Oh, perfect. Another problem. Kalos's image flickered. Meet me at the coordinates I am sending. I have information that may change everything. The message ended, and a set of coordinates appeared on the screen. Ethan crossed his arms. So, do we trust him? Veyara looked at the numbers, her expression unreadable. I don't know, but we have no choice. The bounty hunter arrives. They barely had time to leave the tunnel before an explosion rocked the ground behind them. The entrance they had just come through collapsed in a cloud of dust. Ethan coughed. What the hell was that? Veyara's face turned pale. They found us. A voice echoed through the cavern. Cold, mechanical, unforgiving. Run if you like, princess. It will not change your fate. Ethan turned toward the voice, and his stomach dropped. A towering figure stepped through the dust. Black armor, a visor that glowed red, a massive energy rifle slung over his back. Veyara whispered the name like a curse. Draxis. Ethan gulped. I take it he's not here to talk. Veyara didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Ethan's arm and ran. Shots fired behind them. The walls exploded with bursts of blue energy. Damn it, Ethan shouted. I hate running. Veyara led him through a narrow passage, the air growing colder. We need to lose him. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Draxis was moving steadily, not rushing, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to go. Ethan gritted his teeth. We can't outrun him forever. Veyara pulled a small device from her belt. We won't have to. She threw the device behind them. A second later, boom! The tunnel collapsed, blocking Draxis from following. Ethan bent over, catching his breath. Please tell me that actually worked. Veyara didn't look convinced. It will slow him down, but not for long. Ethan groaned. Of course not. Why would anything be easy? Veyara grabbed his hand. Come on. We need to find Kalos before he does. Ethan sighed, forcing himself to move. This was getting more dangerous by the second. Ethan and Veyara ran through the darkened caverns, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The air was thick with dust from the collapsed tunnel behind them. Ethan's heart pounded. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he knew stopping was not an option. Behind them, Draxis was coming. Are you sure these coordinates are leading us to Kalos? Ethan asked, his breath ragged. Veyara nodded. Yes, we're close. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. I hope this Admiral of yours is worth it. The hidden base. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a massive underground chamber. Unlike the rough tunnels, this place had smooth metal walls, glowing panels, and ships docked along the sides. It was an old outpost, but still operational. Ethan whistled. Now this is impressive. Veyara's eyes scanned the area. He's here. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Admiral Kalos. He was tall, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a long dark coat, his hands resting calmly behind his back. Despite his aged appearance, there was power in his stance. You made it, Kalos said, his voice deep and measured. Ethan crossed his arms. Barely. We had a metal giant chasing us through the tunnels. Kalos' expression darkened. Draxis. Veyara stepped forward. We need answers. You told us to come here, so talk. Kalos studied her for a moment, then motioned for them to follow. A shocking truth. Inside a dimly lit control room, holographic screens displayed maps of the Empire, intercepted messages, and files on high-ranking officials. Kalos turned to face them. The Council has lied to you, Princess, he said. Veyara frowned. What do you mean? Kalos sighed. The arranged marriage between you and Ethan, it was never about peace. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, I knew that part already. Kalos continued. It was a distraction. The Council used it to gain time while they prepared something far worse. They have no interest in peace. Their true goal is complete domination, starting with Earth. Ethan's stomach tightened. What? Kalos pressed a button on the console. A holographic map of Earth appeared. Red markers blinked across different regions. They have already placed infiltration units across human cities. Kalos said, soon, they will launch a silent takeover. No war, no battles, just control from the shadows. Ethan clenched his fists. And let me guess, once they have Earth, they'd move on to other planets. Kalos nodded. Exactly. Your people would become slaves in their own world without ever realizing it. Veyara shook her head in disbelief. This cannot be true. Kalos's gaze softened. I once believed in the Council, just as you did. But I saw what they were planning. When I tried to stop them, they branded me a traitor. Veyara took a shaky breath. Then, why did they choose Ethan for this marriage? Kalos hesitated. Because they underestimated humans. They believed a single man from Earth could never be a threat. But Ethan has done what no one else has. He made you question them. Ethan sighed. Well, that's just great. So what do we do now? Kalos's eyes gleamed. We fight back. Draxis attacks. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared. A robotic voice echoed through the chamber. Unidentified presence detected. Security breach in Sector 7. Ethan's blood ran cold. Tell me that's not. Boom. The metal doors exploded inward, and through the smoke stepped Draxis. His red visor glowed like burning embers. The massive bounty hunter lifted his rifle and pointed it straight at Ethan. You have nowhere left to run, Draxis said, his voice cold and mechanical. Ethan dove to the side as a shot blasted past him, scorching the metal floor. Veyara and Kalos quickly took cover behind the control panels. Kalos cursed. He got here faster than I expected. Ethan peeked from behind a crate. Any bright ideas? Kalos's fingers flew across the controls. There's a small fighter ship docked in the hangar. If we reach it, we can escape. Ethan winced. And if we don't? Kalos gave him a grim look. Then we die here. Ethan sighed. Why is that always the only option? Draxis stepped forward, his rifle charging up for another shot. Give up. You cannot win. Ethan smirked. Yeah, I've heard that before. The escape. Kalos pressed a final button. And the hangar doors opened. Now, he shouted. Ethan and Veyara sprinted toward the fighter ship. Kalos stayed behind, firing at Draxis to slow him down. Draxis barely flinched. He marched forward like an unstoppable machine. Ethan jumped into the cockpit. Veyara, get us in the air. Veyara's fingers flew over the controls. A ship rumbled to life. Kalos fired one last shot before Draxis lunged at him. The two clashed, locked in battle as Ethan and Veyara's ship lifted off. Ethan shouted, We can't leave him. Veyara's face was pained. We have no choice. Below, Kalos looked up at them. He gave a small nod. Then, Draxis struck him down. The ship shot out of the hangar, speeding into the dark sky. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The small fighter ship raced through the dark void of space, its engines roaring as Veyara pushed it to full speed. Ethan sat beside her, his fists clenched. His heart still pounded from what they had just witnessed. Kalos was gone. Draxis had struck him down right before their eyes, and they had been forced to flee. We should have helped him, Ethan muttered, staring at the vast emptiness outside. Veyara's grip tightened on the controls. If we had stayed, we would be dead too. Kalos knew that. He wanted us to escape. Ethan exhaled sharply. So what now? The Council's still out there, planning to take over Earth. Draxis is hunting us. We have no allies left. Veyara's golden eyes flickered with determination. Then we do what no one expects. We strike first. A dangerous plan, The ship's navigation screen lit up as Veyara entered new coordinates. Ethan frowned. "Where are we going?" Veyara turned to him. "To the royal warship. The Council is preparing their final move from there. It's the heart of their operations." Ethan blinked. "Wait, you're saying we're going straight into enemy territory? That's not a plan. That's suicide." Veyara didn't flinch. "If we destroy their command center, their forces will collapse. Without leadership, the invasion will fall apart." Ethan leaned back, rubbing his face. "Great. So we just have to sneak onto the most heavily guarded warship in the galaxy and take down an empire. No problem." Veyara smirked slightly. "You humans do love impossible odds, don't you?" Ethan chuckled. "You have no idea." Approaching the royal warship. Hours later, the massive royal warship came into view, the colossal fortress in space, surrounded by a fleet of escort ships. Dozens of defense cannons lined its surface, and patrolling fighters swarmed around it like angry wasps. Ethan whistled. "That's a lot of firepower." Veyara's hands moved quickly over the ship's console. "We can't fight our way in. But I know a way to slip past the defenses." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how's that?" Veyara pulled up a holographic map of the warship. "There's a secret maintenance tunnel used by engineers. If we time it right, we can slip in unnoticed." Ethan studied the map, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." The ship drifted toward the fleet, its engines running silent. Veyara's hands moved with expert precision, guiding them through the gaps in patrol routes. Ethan held his breath as they passed dangerously close to a guard ship. For a moment, he was sure they had been spotted. But then, they slipped through the maintenance hatch undetected. Ethan let out a breath. "I can't believe that actually worked." Veyara grinned. "We're not inside yet. Stay sharp." Infiltrating the warship. The maintenance bay was dark and quiet, filled with crates, pipes, and old machinery. Ethan and Veyara stepped out of the ship, weapons ready. Veyara whispered, "We need to reach the main control room. From there, we can disable the warship's defense systems." Ethan nodded. "Lead the way." They moved quickly through the dim corridors, avoiding security drones and guards. Every step was filled with tension. One wrong move, and alarms would sound. As they reached a junction, Ethan froze. Footsteps echoed ahead. "Guards," he whispered. Veyara pressed against the wall, watching as two armored soldiers walked past. They were speaking in hushed voices. "Council says the human and the princess are still alive." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "So they knew we escaped." The second guard grunted. "Draxis will find them. It's only a matter of time." As the guards moved on, Veyara grabbed Ethan's arm. "Let's go, before more show up." The heart of the enemy. After sneaking through the maze of corridors, they finally reached the main control room. Ethan peered inside. The room was filled with consoles and holographic displays, and in the center stood a tall figure in royal robes. Veyara's breath caught. "High Chancellor Malvik." Ethan whispered, "The guy behind everything." Veyara nodded grimly. "Yes. If we stop him, we stop the invasion." Ethan smirked. "Then let's crash his party." They moved swiftly. Ethan disabled the security systems, locking the doors to prevent reinforcements from arriving. Then, they stepped forward. Malvik turned slowly, his cold, reptilian eyes studying them. He didn't look surprised. "So, you finally arrived," Malvik said. "I must admit, I expected you sooner." Ethan raised his weapon. "Yeah, well, traffic was bad." Malvik smirked. "Do you truly believe you can stop this? The Council has already decided Earth's fate." Veyara stepped forward. "You're wrong. The people won't follow you once they learn the truth." Malvik chuckled. "The people follow power. And right now, I hold it." Ethan fired. Malvik dodged with inhuman speed, his hand glowing with energy. He unleashed a blast, knocking Ethan back. Veyara drew her blade and charged. Malvik met her strike with ease, his strength overwhelming. But Veyara fought fiercely, her attacks precise and relentless. Ethan gritted his teeth, shaking off the pain. All right, enough of this. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small explosive device. Hey, Malvik, Ethan shouted. The High Chancellor turned just as Ethan threw the explosive at the control panel. Boom! The room shook violently as sparks and fire erupted from the consoles. The control systems were destroyed. Malvik's eyes widened. What have you done? Ethan grinned. I just shut down your fleet. Outside, the warship's defenses collapsed. The escort ships lost control. The Council's invasion fleet was crippled. Malvik staggered back, rage in his eyes. You fool. Ethan smirked. No, I'm just human. Veyara grabbed Ethan's arm. We need to go. Now. As alarms blared, they ran for the exit. Malvik's furious voice echoed behind them. You will not escape. The warship shook as alarms blared across its massive halls. Ethan and Veyara ran through the dark corridors, their hearts pounding. The explosion had done its job. The fleet was disabled, and the royal warship was no longer the unstoppable force it once was. But their escape was far from guaranteed. Veyara glanced at Ethan, determination in her eyes. We don't have much time. The evacuation pods are just ahead. We need to reach them before Draxis catches up. Ethan nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. I'm not letting him win. Not now. A new threat. As they approached the docking bay, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. Draxis had arrived. The hulking figure of the general appeared at the end of the corridor, his armor gleaming menacingly in the dim light. His expression was cold, filled with fury. You think you've won. Draxis's voice rumbled, low and dangerous. You're just delaying the inevitable. Ethan's heart raced. The last thing they needed was another confrontation with Draxis. But there was no choice now. There was nowhere to run. Veyara stepped forward, her blade drawn. We're not running anymore, Draxis. This ends today. Draxis's eyes narrowed. So you think you can defeat me? You're nothing but insects. His voice was filled with contempt. I will wipe out your rebellion, and then I will finish what I started on Earth. The clash. Before Ethan could react, Draxis charged with the speed of a predator. He swung his massive blade, a deadly arc of energy cutting through the air. Veyara barely dodged, her body moving with incredible agility as she parried his strike with her own sword. Ethan fired his blaster at Draxis, but the shots barely made a dent in the general's armor. Draxis growled, swatting the blasts aside like they were nothing. Damn it, Ethan muttered, reloading his weapon. Veyara continued to fight, her movements fast and precise, but she knew that taking down Draxis was no easy task. His strength and sheer power were unmatched. She needed a strategy, a way to outsmart him, not just overpower him. Come on, Draxis, Veyara taunted, dodging another brutal strike. Is this the best you've got? The general sneered. You'll pay for your arrogance, princess. A desperate plan. Ethan glanced around, spotting a small control panel along the wall. His eyes lit up with an idea. Veyara, he shouted, we need to get him away from that door. Veyara didn't hesitate. On it. She distracted Draxis with a series of swift, graceful moves. While he was focused on her, Ethan sprinted towards the panel, reaching it just in time. With a quick press of a button, the docking bay door began to close, cutting off the general's path. Draxis roared in fury as he rushed forward, but it was too late. The doors slammed shut, trapping him inside the corridor. Ethan quickly activated the emergency escape pods, the doors opening with a soft hiss. Let's go, he urged, motioning for Veyara to follow. Escape to safety. The two of them scrambled into one of the escape pods, the hatch closing behind them. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief as the pod's engines roared to life, lifting them away from the warship. As they ascended, The warship loomed below them, now a chaotic mess of sparks and failing systems. The royal warship was falling apart, its once imposing power now a shadow of its former self. Ethan looked at Veyara. "We did it. We actually did it." Veyara smiled, though her expression was still tense. "We've only won this battle, Ethan. The war isn't over yet, but we've given humanity a chance." The final confrontation. Suddenly, the pod's alarms blared. A shadow passed over them as Draxis's personal fighter appeared on their radar. He had followed them. "Damn it, he's not giving up," Ethan growled. He could see Draxis's fighter closing in fast, the powerful engines roaring. Veyara turned to him, her eyes sharp. "We have one chance. If we can get to the planet's atmosphere before he locks onto us, we might lose him in the clouds." Ethan gritted his teeth. "I'm not running anymore." He slammed his hand on the controls, pushing the pod's engines to their limit. The ship surged forward, rapidly approaching the dense atmosphere of the planet below. Draxis fired, his shots narrowly missing the escape pod. But they didn't stop. The atmosphere grew thicker, the pod shaking as it entered the clouds. The fighter pursuing them struggled to keep up, the dense air slowing its descent. For a moment, it looked like they might escape. But then, Draxis launched a final barrage of missiles. "Brace for impact," Veyara shouted. Ethan slammed his hands on the controls, trying to evade the missiles. The pod swerved violently, narrowly avoiding the blasts. But one missile grazed the side, sending a shockwave through the pod. Sparks flew, and the pod began to spin out of control. "Hold on," Ethan shouted, desperately trying to regain control. The pod plummeted toward the surface of the planet, crashing through the clouds. The ground rushed up to meet them. The battle's end. With a deafening crash, the escape pod slammed into the earth. The impact knocked Ethan and Veyara unconscious. When Ethan awoke, the first thing he felt was the pain in his chest. He groaned, blinking as his surroundings came into focus. The pod had crashed into a dense jungle, and the wreckage lay scattered around them. "Veyara," he mumbled, trying to push himself up. She was already awake, her eyes sharp. "We're alive." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with relief. "That's the most important thing." Looking toward the future, as the two of them crawled out of the wreckage, they gazed up at the sky. Draxis was still out there, but for now, they were safe. Veyara turned to Ethan. "We've lost a lot, but we've gained something important: humanity's strength. We've shown the galaxy what Earth is capable of." Ethan nodded. "We'll rebuild. And next time, we'll finish what we started." The battle wasn't over, but they had set the stage for the future. Together, they had survived, and together, they would continue the fight. The human spirit was strong, and no empire, no matter how powerful, could crush it. And as they ventured into the unknown world before them, they knew that the story of their survival had only just begun.